In the early 16th century, Martin Luther translated the Bible into the common tongue, challenged the religious monopoly of Rome, and set off a chain reaction that permanently altered European history. But the man who championed the Word of God as the ultimate authority was surprisingly willing to censor it. He actively campaigned to have one specific book purged from the New Testament. Luther targeted the Book of James. He dismissed the text as an epistle of straw, claiming it lacked any true evangelical character. When the chief architect of Protestantism tries to burn a book of the Bible, it signals a massive ideological fracture at the very foundation of the faith. To understand Luther's hostility, we have to look at the Apostle Paul. Paul established the central pillar of the Reformation, the idea that salvation is a free gift of grace, achieved through faith alone. Then you open the book of James and find a direct collision. James presents a blunt thesis that seemingly strikes at Paul's core message: faith without works is dead. Early theologians struggled to bridge this gap. On paper, these two absolute statements appeared completely irreconcilable. This tension highlights a recurring human struggle: the distance between a theoretical philosophy held in the mind and the physical behavior exhibited in the world. The identity of the author changes the entire context of the argument. James was the biological brother of Jesus, and for years he was a massive skeptic of his brother's claims. It took witnessing the execution and reported resurrection of his own sibling to trigger a total psychological shift. James went from mocking his brother's ministry to leading his church in Jerusalem. James wasn't writing for wealthy scholars in comfortable academies. He was writing to scattered, impoverished Jewish Christians facing intense oppression from powerful landlords. He wasn't drafting a sterile theological textbook. He was writing a gritty survival guide for a marginalized community under immense physical pressure. Because the stakes were so high, James had no patience for church members who claimed spiritual piety while economically exploiting the poor. He viewed this hypocrisy as a form of double-mindedness. He audited their behavior through 3 specific tests, starting with the test of words. James argued the town is a tiny rudder that steers an entire ship, or a single spark that can burn down a forest. Next was the test of action. He pointed out that offering thoughts and prayers to a starving person without providing physical food is a useless gesture. He defined pure religion as measurable social justice, specifically the physical and financial care of society's most vulnerable, like widows and orphans. Finally, he applied the test of pressure. James framed extreme trials not as divine punishments, but as the testing ground required to prove if faith is resilient. James established a radical forensic standard. Internal beliefs have no meaning unless they produce observable evidence in the real world. To illustrate the danger of hearing the truth without acting on it, James used a specific, piercing analogy. He compared it to a person looking at their own face in a mirror, walking away, and immediately suffering total amnesia about their appearance. Hearing a message and refusing to act on it creates a disconnect. The observer walks away convinced they have reached a destination they haven't even started toward. This reveals exactly where Martin Luther misunderstood the text. He assumed James and Paul were fighting the same battle, but they were actually targeting 2 different enemies. The Apostle Paul was fighting legalism, the idea that humans can buy their own salvation by strictly following a set of religious rules. James, however, was fighting complacency, the assumption that receding grace requires absolutely no change in a person's life or character. When viewed this way, the tension disappears. Behavior serves as the observable proof of an internal change, rather than the currency used to purchase it. The Book of James remains in the biblical canon as an audit of human behavior. It forces a direct confrontation between our spiritual claims and our physical reality. James strips away comforting religious vocabulary and demands that we look at the raw data of our lives. If a stranger analyzed your bank statements, your calendar, and your actions, but never heard your words, what would they assume you believe?